I think as a collective, we all wish that every book that we read was 5 stars, best thing ever. But unfortunately, that's just not the case. And that is what happened with these books. Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Brie and this is 4 Paws in a Book. Today we're going to be talking about the worst books that I read in 2024. I should not have to do this disclaimer, but I'm going to anyways. Reading is subjective. If one of these books is on your favorites list or you loved one of these books, I'm so happy for you. I am so glad that the book worked for you or that you got what the author was trying to convey. Unfortunately for me, it didn't work with these books. Also, just as a quick disclaimer, because I do know that I have some authors that watch my videos, reviews are for readers. And so if negative content is not your speed, if you're not a fan of that, then come back tomorrow where I'm going to be talking about my best books of the year. With that out of the way, I have 10 books that I think are the worst books that I read, and then 5 more that are disappointing, that we're calling them dishonorable mentions, because tomorrow we're gonna have honorable mentions. These are books I had really high expectations for and they just let me down in one way, shape, or form. Let's start with those disappointments. The first one is Beneath the Alabaster Spire by Alison Carr Wechter. This is the second book in the Immortal Order series. The first book in the series, I don't know if it was a right book, right place. I don't know if it was just like the perfect blend of a book, but I resonated with those characters so much. And so I was really excited to go into the second book. I read this during Amazing Readathon, and I will have links to all of the vlogs where I talked about these books because I'm pretty sure almost every single book has a vlog or a video dedicated to it. So I'll have everything linked in the description below if you're interested. But this one was such a disappointment. There was so much smut in this book, and by the time we actually got around to doing anything, it was too little too late. This series definitely is more smut forward. There is a lot more smut in it than some of the other romanticises that I have read this year, but this one took it to a whole nother extreme. And for me, smut or sex scenes in books need to have a point. It's not just going to be like smut for smut's sake. It has to have a reason, a meaning. It needs to further the plot or further the character development. And for me in this book, it just did not. I do absolutely love the queer norm representation that is in this series, and the characters are dealing with a lot of things like PTSD and other mental health struggles, and I love that representation in books, specifically in romantasy where we see sometimes a lack of diversity. So I don't want to discredit that. I just feel like this book probably should have been a duology, but we tried to stretch it out into 3 books, and because of that, this book suffered severely with middle book syndrome, and it just didn't feel like it had enough of a point until the very end. My next disappointment I read in August during Battleathon, and that is Dark Restraint by Katie Robert. I love this series. The Dark Olympus series has been a staple on my channel. I have read it since the very beginning, and I've loved almost every single one of the books until we get here. Ariadne and the Minotaur are not my favorite couple. They never were my favorite characters, even when they were introduced as side characters. So this isn't one that I was like necessarily looking forward to as an all-time favorite, but it's Katie Robert. I wanted to continue the series. This relationship felt so codependent. Both of these characters needed therapy a lot more than they needed to be in a relationship, and I will stand by that. This is definitely the trope of he's only good for her, and other than that he's a monster. I just can't get behind that as like someone wanting to root for a relationship. It's really hard when I don't actually care about the main characters and I don't actually want to see them together. I also really didn't like the way that they portrayed Dionysus in this book. We've met Dionysus in previous books, and he's kind of a great guy, and he really gets the short end of the stick in this book, and it just made me sad for him, honestly. So I'm not done with the series. I definitely will continue on. We still have, I think, 2 more books before the series concludes, and I do really love the bigger plot that is happening in this series, the politics and the rivalry that is happening outside of the individual relationships in each book. So that's definitely a positive for this, but for this book, it was such a disappointment, and I wasn't rooting for the relationship, which is the point of a romance book. My next disappointing read was The Vacation by John Mars. If you have been around my channel for any length of time, you will know that I was introduced to John Mars this summer, and you will see another one of his books on tomorrow's list. I love his stories. There is so much social commentary in them, the characters have a lot of depth, and a lot of his books have this little futuristic twist to daily life, and then everything everything else around it turns on its head, which is something I absolutely love in books. Unfortunately, I think The Vacation was just a product of, this is a really old book of his. And you can definitely tell the growth of his writing in the past several years since writing this book. In some of his more recent books, we still have this very large cast of characters, but everyone is unique. Everyone has a very different character voice. In The Vacation, we had a ton of characters, and I couldn't tell who was who. Nobody had any depth. Nobody had anything that separated them out from other characters. And because I never really understood who the characters were, what their motivations were, or anything like that, when things started happening to the characters, I didn't care. I was like, oh, he died? Why is that important? So while this book is disappointing in the fact that up until this point, I had given most of his books 5 stars, if not 4 stars. But at the same time, it makes sense, right? This book is almost 10 years old and it was republished as The Vacation. It had been titled something else, and it really just shows how much John has grown as an author and how much his writing has matured and gotten better in the past decade. Next up on my disappointing reads is Phantasma by Kaylee Smith, and this one hurts because this one had the potential to be so good. The book started out really strong. There is OCD rep in here and a lot of mental health and anxiety representation, which again, I've been saying romantasy is lacking in that diversity and representation. And so when I see a book with that in it, I want to champion it. I want to scream it from the rooftops. But this book was so boring. I did not care about this book. I did not care about what was happening. It has like levels of hell, right? She's going through these trials at each level of hell, but we didn't understand the competition, the trial, or anything like that at each level. And so because of that, it kind of just felt redundant because we really weren't let in on the technicalities or the intricacies of each level and each trial. My other problem with this is that the love interest really felt like he was a curmudgeonly old man. He felt like he was 300 years old. And he was immortal, so he kind of was, but I've read a ton of romantasy this year with immortals as love interest, and they don't feel like they're 300 years old. And so it was really hard to see it as a romance, see these characters work together and fall for each other when she seems so young and naive, and he is, well, him. The concept of this book was so interesting. Obviously, we do not see a ton of books that take place in hell. And the ones that I have read up until that point were really good. Ninth House, I'm looking at you. But this is a case where the concept was phenomenal and the execution just really left me unsatisfied. Finally, my last disappointing read I just read last week. Make the Season Bright by Ashley Herring Blake. I have seen this on a lot of people's worst books of the year, and so I'm not surprised. I was in several group chats of people reading this book over the Christmas holiday, and I was very hesitant to go into it, but it's Ashley. I want to read all of her books. Ashley wrote one of my favorite sapphic romances in Delilah Green and Astor Parker. Those books made my best books of the year when I read them. So despite the negative opinions that I had heard about this, I still went into it with a really open mind. And like I have said up until this point, when you are reading a romance, you want the characters to get together. Right? You're rooting for that relationship. I was not rooting for this relationship. Okay? She left her fiance at the altar with no explanation. There are very few things that would make me want to take someone back if they left me at the altar. Pretty much like if they went into witness protection. That's it. Not just because they didn't feel like it, or they were feeling rushed, or they were having second thoughts. My friend, what? That is not something you come back from. You have to communicate. One of the things I loved about this book was the found family aspect. It is something that Ashley does so well, and she did fantastically in her Bright Fall series as well. We have this wonderful queer community that is encircling our main characters, and there were other characters in that friend group that I was like, oh, I want to see that romance. I want to see them together. I didn't care about our actual 2 main characters. This has a fun, cozy Colorado Christmas feel to it. I read it all on Christmas Day, and so it wasn't something that took a lot of time, took a lot of effort to read, but I was still disappointed. All right, those were my disappointments. Now let's talk about the actual worst books that I read in 2024. Again, if these were your favorites or you loved them, I am so happy for you. But let's rant for just a minute. I do have these ranked from number 10 to number 1, with number 10 being the least worst and number 1 being the worst book that I read. So coming in at number 10 is Loki: Journey into Mystery by Catherine Locke. This is a book that I read for the Loki vlog that I did prior to Amazing Readathon coming out, and oh boy, I had high expectations for this. And I actually debated putting this one down into the disappointments, but I couldn't think of another one of those 5 that should have been here. So this is where we're landing. I read 3 books for this vlog, and they kind of ramped up from least like the Marvel Loki to most like the Marvel Loki. And so when we got to this point, I was expecting great things. So many of the reviews had talked about how the voice of the character sounds just like the Loki that is in the show and the movies, and the narrator sounded just like Tom Hiddleston, and they had had such a wonderful time and experience. My friends, were we reading the same book? Because this was nothing like Tom Hiddleston in character or in voice. This book was as bland as Wonder Bread. There was absolutely no character depth to it. There was no sarcasm, there was no energy, no life to it. I actually went back and watched the vlog just to kind of see my initial thoughts about it. One thing that I said just kind of stuck out, and that is that reading this book was like drinking 3-day-old Diet Coke. It was that flat. I truly do not remember the actual plot or the story of this book, which again just makes it so forgettable when the character of Loki is one of my favorites, and I should have loved this book. Coming in my number 9 spot is No Rings Attached by Rachel Lacey. This was just not the year for contemporary romance, I think. This is a sapphic fake dating relationship, and so on paper, this sounds perfect, right? It's about a girl who has to go back home to London for, I believe, her brother's wedding, and she had told her mom, hey, I'm dating this girl, and hadn't really gone into details, right? It was just to get her mom off her back. But then this imaginary girlfriend also gets invited to the wedding. So our main character invites a friend of a friend to be the girlfriend, right? To hang out for the week, right? Free trip to London. Sounds great. So first I'm going to talk about the minor squabbles that I have with this book, just some things that I would have done differently, and then I'm going to talk about the things that actually pissed me off. The premise of this book is set around a wedding. Rom-coms that have weddings in them generally have hijinks. They have shenanigans. They have everything that could go wrong does go wrong. And that's what makes a fun wedding romance fun. It has a very rom-com feel to it. I read the first book from this author last year and had a great time with it. I thought it was funny, I thought the jokes really landed, and the situations that our characters were getting into were very entertaining. This one lost all of its soul. We really actually finished up with the wedding a lot sooner than we could have. We could have really expanded it. We could have really dug deep into the character development at a wedding. So that was just my minor squabble with it. Here's what pissed me off. This book, for being a sapphic romance, is pretty homophobic, specifically ace-phobic. The person that our main character has set up for this fake girlfriend straight up said when they got together, hey, I don't do romance, I don't do relationships, it's just not my cup of tea. Also, I don't really do one-night stands because I don't develop that connection with somebody. I don't feel the same way that most people do. So while on page it doesn't say this character is Demi, all of the cards are there. And this is something that the author really could have dove into, really uncovered the representation there, because that's not an identity that we see a lot in romance books. It is starting to come up a little bit more, but it's vastly underrepresented in media and specifically in contemporary romance books. We are seeing more and more people that are coming out as queer or falling somewhere under the LGBTQIA+ umbrella, and a lot of that is because they see themselves as a character in a book. And so if the author would have used this opportunity to highlight demi or ace representation, I think it could have gone a long way in the queer bookish space. But no, of course not. At the end of the book, at the end of the story, they fall for each other, they catch their feelings, and she wasn't ace, she wasn't demi, she just hadn't found the right relationship. And that just feels lazy. It feels like a cop-out. You can have a romantic relationship and still be demi, still be ace, but it was never addressed, and it just felt like such a missed opportunity. And when I finished the book, I was just kind of pissed off. Coming in at number 8 And I, too, am surprised that it is this low. But as I look at this list, I couldn't put it any higher, which means that I had some duds this year. And we're gonna fix that in 2025. But coming in at number 8 is People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. This is where you're all gonna hit unsubscribe and you're all gonna leave the video. It's cool. It's cool. We can still be friends. This book was where I found out that Emily Henry and I are probably just not going to work together. I had read Book Lovers prior to this and didn't love it, but I was told that this was going to be the book that would work for me. It had tropes that I would really like, and based on people that hadn't liked Book Lovers but still really enjoyed this one, I went into this book really hopeful. And oh my god, these two characters need so much therapy. Okay, I think that's the theme of 2024. All of our romance characters need therapy. Your battery shouldn't die when you're going on a rant. That's just unfair. Where was I? Oh yes, characters need therapy. These two characters are so codependent and not good for each other in the slightest. I would hesitate to say that they are good as friends. They certainly were not good as romantic partners. This book is about two friends who used to go on vacations together, then they kind of had a falling out, then for one reason or another, they are getting back together for this one last trip. I don't know, don't care. There is so much miscommunication in this book, like so much. The characters don't talk to each other. Despite being stuck in a car together, they don't talk, which is really hard to do when you're stuck in a car together. Also, if I had to hear one more time that the air conditioner was broken at their rental, I was going to pull my hair out. I get it, your air conditioner is broken. I got it the first time. You don't need to tell me 7 more times. A while back there was this trend going around on TikTok where people were taking characters from romance books and trying to figure out if they would still be together 6 months, a year, 2 years after the epilogue ended. And my answer for these two, no way. No way. Also, I don't want to be their therapist because they have a lot of issues and I don't know that anyone can actually help them. They need a lot of help, but I don't want to be the one to help them. Coming in at number 7 is another book that I read during Amazing Readathon, so that was fun. I had my best month on the channel, but I had some real duds during that month. And that is Reset by Serena Dolan, I believe is the author's name. This is a utopian, dystopian story about a society that like every 4 years their memories are reset so that they don't have any prejudices. So the idea of racism, of classism, all this other stuff is been deleted from their minds. But along with that, the relationships that you have formed, the partnerships, everything like that, also gets wiped from your memory. It's an interesting concept, and one of the things I love about dystopian novels, when it's done well, is that the author has just free reign, this sandbox to play in of a world to create, and can create whatever world they want. And it's always really fun to watch authors start to play with reality, start to play with, you know, psychology and the society and how we work around things. It's one of the things that draws me to dystopian novels, but at the same time, it's also what makes them a really hard sell. Because if an author doesn't explain the reason for their world building or explain why they built it a certain way, it doesn't make sense to me. And that is one of the problems with this book. The idea is that when your memories are reset, your prejudices are also reset, so you go into the world fresh and new. But unfortunately, I think the author had some prejudices when writing this book that did not get addressed or did not get pushed away because we didn't have any discussion of queer norm societies. We didn't have any discussion of poly relationships. It was all very much cis het normative as far as, you know, you are destined to be with this person, and it was always somebody of the opposite gender. And it was just like, it was really weird and kind of fundy culture almost. And one of the things that really irked me about this book was the whole idea is that there were some people, the dreamers, that could see beyond their reset. They could remember images and flashes of things that happened before their reset. And there's this one character who was like, I was married to you previously, you know, we are supposed to be together, we're supposed to be together throughout all of the ages, and, you know, we're just waiting for you to figure that out. And he said something like, you know, I didn't have sex during the, you know, while we were apart, I waited for you, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, cool, I didn't, because I didn't know you existed. And he said something along the lines of like, that's okay, I forgive you, you didn't know better, something like that. And it was just like, It was 80% of the way into the book and I almost wanted to DNF it there. Should have probably, honestly. Coming in at number 6 was a book club book. You know, book club books are just cursed. That's a problem. But that is The Au Pair Affair by Tessa Bailey. I read this book with Brittany for the Accidental Book Club. Our whole book club was started because we started reading Fangirl Down. We wanted golf romance. And then we were like, oh, the sequel's hockey romance. Let's try that. Remember how for literally the entire video today, I've been saying if I don't believe the romance and I don't want the two people together, then the romance doesn't work. Never before is this a truer statement than right now. This is a single dad nanny romance. At its base, this sounds amazing. This sounds like it should work. I feel like this book was definitely inspired by Roy Kent. And his grumpiness, and granted it's hockey, not soccer, but he's very much Roy Kent. He is old, he's grumpy, he is, you know, suffering from an injury that he's trying to hide. And she is bubbly and young and naive and also has a traumatic backstory with an ex that is just completely wiped under the rug. She was mentally and emotionally abused from a previous relationship. And there's a part in the third act conflict that honestly just felt so fabricated. It just like was there because it needed to be there because it's romance, so we have to have a third act conflict. God forbid, we just don't have a conversation. But he was yelling at her, he's calling her names, and he was doing it to push her away. That is the worst thing that someone can do when he knows what her story is. He's not coming back at this point. He does not get a second chance. But, you know, he's hot, he's sexy, so like, of course we're gonna go to the beach for this wedding thing and, you know, shenanigans. I was so annoyed by the end of this book. I was so annoyed how quickly these things happened after the fact, and I just like, I couldn't get behind it because if somebody were to talk to me like that, knowing that history, absolutely not. I would not have given him the time of day. Coming in at number 5 is Assistant to the Villain by Hannah Nicole Mayer. I read this in anticipation of the Goodreads Choice Awards. I knew that Apprentice would be on the list, so I was like, you know what, I'm going to give it a good old college try. We're going to attempt to read this book, knowing that it wasn't a Brie book. Had it not been for this video, I wouldn't have read this book. Nothing about it sounds like a Brie book, so it's not surprising that this is here, but honestly, like, it was worse than what I expected. And here's the thing, I know people love this book, okay? People love this book, and the TikToks that inspired and created this story are actually really funny. They're cute, they're quirky, and they really work in 3-minute segments. They do not work well in 350-page novels. Our main character is so infantilized, and if you look at the books that I love, specifically in the romantasy genre, but even in the romance genre, in thrillers, in horror, stuff like that, when you look at the common denominator of things that I like, they are strong, badass, stabby women. Whatever she was not that. When you call your love interest a nincompoop, I cannot take you seriously. It's all downhill from there. And I think the audiobook made it so much worse because the narrator really had this like childlike voice, and it was high pitched and it was a little whiny and very bubbly. And so you have the words on the page of this person that, like, you know, says nincompoop and acts like a literal child, and then you have the narrator that is just adding to that. It felt really weird once we started getting to the more romantic scenes. I know this is going to be on a lot of people's best books of the year. I've already seen it on a lot of people's, so please do not come for me. I did not like this book. Coming in at number 4 is A Ruin of Roses by K.F. Breene. This is a book that I read actually for Booktuber Favorites last year, so that's fun. This was very much a sense of I didn't know what I liked in romantasy at the time. This is a very smutty romantasy book. This is a book that happens to take place in a fantastical world, but is really just a romance. It's very much a ripoff of Beauty and the Beast. Like, I could call it a retelling, but they didn't do a lot of retelling, other than all of the characters are shifters. So I guess that is unique, sort of. We did have one of the side characters, Lumiere, the Lumiere character, who was, you know, very flamboyant, very over the top, and, you know, he very much like played like a drag queen, which I kind of loved, but that was the only shining moment of this book. So many times our beast character was, you know, overtaken by lust or whatever, and it wasn't, you know, it's not me that loves you, it is my animal that wants you, and like, bleh. And I read it, so you have to hear it. They were overcome with lust magic. That is a sentence in the book. I do apologize for that. Anyways, I've come a long way since January, and I now have a much better idea of what I like in books, and romantasy specifically. This was a big miss for me. Coming in at number 3 is You Had Your Chance, Lee Burrows by Piper Rain. This was a football romance. I guess you can call it that. He was a football player. That I know. She was a trainer for the football team. But I'm not sure that our author has ever actually watched a football game or knows anything about team rivalries, team schedules, the game of football in general. Football romances are hard because, like, I am a diehard football fan. It became a hyperfixation about 5 years ago, and I haven't looked back since. I know more about football and more about the intricacies of football than the average woman, the average female. I was the commissioner of my fantasy football league this year, so I know some things. This book had so many inaccuracies in it as far as the teams that they were playing, and even the positions that people were talking about. And beyond that, in just a plot and a writing structure, this made no sense. There were times where they were talking about the fact that they were going to Denver to play their game, but then in the next paragraph they're saying that they beat LA, and you're like, well, did we skip a week, or did you forget that we were going to Denver as the author? So structurally, that was a big problem. As far as the romance, again, I didn't believe the two should be together. I didn't want the two together. It's a second chance romance, which is a hard sell for me in general, but they were together in college, and then they split up because, like, he said something, he did something, I don't even remember what it was, but, like, it wasn't a good reason to not be together. It was a good reason to have a conversation about something back when you were in college, but it's definitely not a good reason to get back together now. You're a very different person than who you were in college, which means that you really have to sell me on the fact that you should still be with your college boyfriend. My number 2 book, and the worst contemporary romance of the year, was Hate by Tate James. This is a why choose revenge romance, which doesn't sound like it would work for me personally, and it was so far beyond what I thought it was going to be in all of the wrong ways. This is about a woman who gets arrested, goes to jail because of a miscommunication, like, right, she was in the wrong place at the wrong time when the police raided this fight, so she goes to jail. She comes back after getting out of jail, and there are 4 men that are living in her house, and they happen to be the men that were the witnesses that put her away. Does not sound like a great setup, honestly, but you know, they're all hot and they did a lot of the fucking. A why choose romance has a lot of extra work to do because you have multiple characters, multiple men in this case, that you have to create character depth and intricacies for. And a lot of books do that really well. This one did not. I can't even tell you at this point how many men there were, let alone their names, interesting things about them, other than they all, for the love of all things holy, kept saying Madison Kate during sex, okay? If someone used my middle name during sex, I would slap them. It's not sexy. And when you're listening to it on audiobook, it's just like so much worse, honestly. If I was reading it physically, I probably could have gotten past that part, but oh my god, on audio, it was so annoying. Spoiler alert for my best books of the year, I will have a romantasy on there. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody, honestly, but we've come a long way since starting my romantasy journey at the beginning of the year, and I had to do a lot of digging through crap to find the good stuff. And that is the case with this book, my worst book of 2024. And that is Slaying the Frost King. I don't remember the authors. Here is the cover. Honestly, I probably trauma blocked this book out of my mind. I was buddy reading it with Cassidy, which I think probably made the experience at least a little bit more enjoyable because we were constantly talking back and forth. We were quoting things and being like, oh my god, what is this book? This book is written by 2 authors and it was very apparent. I think the way that it was probably done was that each POV was written by a different person. And the reason why I can kind of tell is because the writing styles were so different between the 2 characters. Our male main character was potentially the worst man I've read in a romance. And I have been reading romance for 7 years now. So that is a very high bar. The smut was just not good in this book, in the slightest. Our love interest straight up said he thought that her friend was prettier, said he wanted to be with her. I don't remember, honestly. It was a while ago. I read it back in March. It was a time, okay? It was a time. I do vividly remember one thing though, and that is that there was a smut scene from his perspective, which is already hard to do. Like, it's hard to make smut really good and really powerful when it's done in the male POV. Anyway, this might be one of the worst smut scenes I've read. We read from his POV, him teaching her how to give a blowjob. Nope, absolutely not. After knowing the misogynistic attitude of this man, do you think I want to be in his head when that's happening? Absolutely not. That scene alone pretty much solidified it from March as being the worst book that I was going to read that year. I really hoped back in March that I wasn't going to read something worse than this. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. I was close, but it didn't happen. There were times where I was really thinking almost scientifically about smut scenes, which is never a good thing. If your brain is going there, if you're trying to think about the logistics of a smut scene or how they're doing the things, the author didn't do their job, because you should be in the moment. You should be right along with the character, even if you can't visualize exactly what's going on. You are feeling the feelings. You are caught up in the emotions. If your brain is completely shut off from emotions and you are not doing that, but instead you are thinking about how logically this doesn't work because gravity is a thing that exists, the author did not create enough emotion, did not create a situation in where you as the reader want to dive headfirst. And that is a problem when you are writing smut. Alright, so those were the worst books, the worst things I read in 2024. Here's to hoping that 2025 is going to be a marvelous, magnificent, amazing year, and we will have all of the 5 stars, and I'll have very few to come talk to you about this time next year. Let me know down in the comments below your worst book of 2024, or if you don't have a worst book, tell me a book that just disappointed you, that you had high expectations for and it really let you down. If you are not feeling chatty, do a football emoji. If you want to see some of my plans for 2025, I'm going to link a video right here, and stay tuned. Tomorrow, like I said, we will have our best books of 2024. That is all I have for you today. If you're new here and you have not yet subscribed, there's a little button that you can do so down below the video. If you'd like to hang out with me more, the links to my Instagram, Goodreads, Twitter, and my Patreon are linked in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!